So we are told to study in school, but we're not exactly taught how to learn. Learning how to learn can be one of the biggest game changers in acing your exams. I see so many people wasting so much time doing ineffective methods to try to learn content and cram things, and honestly it just wastes a lot of time in the long run. So in today's video I'm going to be showing you the most effective ways to learn and understand the content for the long term. So let's first talk about the basics. You need to form a framework of what you need to know. One of the biggest ways that you can fail your exam is not knowing what you need to know, and then the one thing that you didn't revise coming up in the exam, because once that happens it's game over for you. Like there's no way that you can change that or improve because you don't even know where to start. So one of the most important things you should do, ideally at the start of the year or at any point if you haven't already, make sure you have a list of everything that you need to learn for the exam. And if you can split this up to each specific exam and what is going to come up, that would be amazing. Ideally you can find these online. So if you're in the UK, for example, and you're studying GCSEs, there is a specification for every single subject which literally writes every single thing that you need to know for the exam, and it basically gives you a kind of checklist, and anything that is not on this, so anything that is taught in school and it's just like something extra or in the textbook and it just seems to go on and on but it's not mentioned in the specification, it basically tells you what to do and what to like ignore, and that's the best thing you can do. There's already a lot of content and you don't want to be revising things that you know are not going to come up. If you're in university and the specification is more ambiguous or there even isn't one, you should look at your lectures, and at the start of each lecture ideally there should be a learning objective. This is basically what you'll use to guide your revision and make sure that you cover all of your weak spots and even the things that you know, because you just want to make sure you go over everything before the exam. So whether you're in university or college, try to find a way that you can write a single list of all of this information, just so that you have this as a reference point throughout the year. You can highlight things, you can tick things off, and it just shows that you've learned something, you've revised it, and you've done the exam papers for it. And this is honestly the best way that you can go about learning everything that's going to come up in your exam, because it's not good enough to know the high yield topics, especially for GCSE. There's some things that just might come up out of nowhere, and you want to make sure that you covered at least everything so you have a guidance on what you can write. It also helps to prevent overlearning, because you guys know there's so much to learn. If you keep adding things that you think are like going to help you in the exam but are realistically never going to come up, you're going to be very overwhelmed and you're not even going to be able to learn the basics because your brain is going to be full of everything and it just gets too much. So cutting down everything to the basics and knowing what you need to know is the most effective way you can start learning the content for the exam. So the second thing you want to do is find out your why. Behind every fact, behind every reason, there's a reason why something happens or a reason why a certain thing has certain features, and if you know why this happens, you are more likely to understand it and more likely to memorize it in the long run. A lot of people try to memorize things just as it is, so they try to memorize a whole sentence in biology, and the thing is, you memorize this sentence and what? In 2 days you're going to forget it, and in 3 days you're not even going to be able to answer a question on it. So what's the point of memorizing something that you don't understand? That's why it's so important at the start of every single lesson, your focus is understanding rather than memorizing, because memorizing blindly is not going to help you in the long run. Learning why something happens makes sure that it always sticks in your brain. Like even if you forget an element of it, once you remember that why, you understand the actual fact and you remember the fact. So for example, one thing that you may think about when you're revising cell structure, you look at the mitochondria and probably like, why is this inner membrane so folded? Why is it so, like, you know, the mitochondria, it looks like a bit weird. Why does it look like this? And if you want to know why and you want to memorize it, you have to search it. So whether you go on Google, whether you go on YouTube, search the reason why something happens. So for example, I did a quick Google search and this basically shows that the mitochondria is structured this way so that it can maximize the surface area, and this is basically to generate more energy, have more enzymes on the surface, and that makes so much sense when you think about it. You'll always remember that fact, and that really helps. So understanding your why is the way that you can understand the facts, because that basically forms the foundation of any memorization. If you are ever confused about something on a lecture or a lesson and you just don't get it in that moment of time, never leave it like that. Never think, okay, by the exam, like when I'm revising, I can just go over it quickly, I can just do this, I can just do that, because at the end of the day you are going to regret it really, really badly when you leave all of these topics that you need to understand in the time that you should be revising the things that you should already know. Like you should be doing exam papers, you should be doing flashcards, you shouldn't be watching a 30-minute video on something that you could have learned at the start of the year. So always make the effort of learning, of understanding every single lecture as it comes, every single lesson as it comes, because you don't want to be at the point where you are struggling, where you're upset, where you're stressed out because you don't know anything, you don't understand anything, you can't even guess because you don't even know where to start. It's very important that you form this level of understanding throughout the year and not just at the end. Another thing is exercise your knowledge. So as you guys know, if you're a gym lad, if you like exercising, if you like, I don't know, doing anything physical, you know that after a good time of doing this physical activity, you're gonna gain some muscle, and this muscle is basically gonna help you be better at whatever you're doing. If you start slacking after a month, you start slacking after a few weeks, you're going to notice that slowly this muscle would start to deteriorate and you'll lose the muscle, and it's going to be hard to get it back. So that basically applies to studying. So when you learn something, you can't just leave it like that. You can't just think, because I learned it this one time, it's going to be in my mind forever. It's not. You really need to exercise that knowledge, and ideally as soon as possible. Probably one of the most effective ways you can practice is by practicing with someone who is well versed in the topic or the subject that you're doing. So someone who actually knows their stuff. And this actually kindly brings me on to today's sponsorship, which is italki. If you haven't heard of italki, get to know it. It's basically an online learning language platform which connects you one-to-one with certified native speaking teachers. So if you're studying a language and you're particularly struggling with things such as sentence structure, accent, general communication skills, and you want to strengthen it, one of the best ways you can do this is by talking to someone who's actually completely fluent in the language, because they are able to recognize patterns that you may not, that your teacher might not even recognize. And I think this is one of the most effective ways you can learn a language in particular. And to test it out, I actually booked my own lesson, and I'm going to insert it here, but let's just say it was really fun, and I would recommend it.
The B is like the V in B. D, as in you're focusing on the E, you're not looking at the A. Yes.
B, D, A,
yes.
So as you guys can see, it is a really great experience. It can be really hard to find a native speaker or like a really fluent speaker to practice with on a daily basis. So having something like this is just really helpful and useful for your language development. These one-to-one customized language sessions are way more effective than conventional and more passive ways of revising a language, such as reading a textbook or watching videos. Ultimately, these can help to a degree, but nothing will help as much as practicing with someone who's fluent. So why not try today? It is an amazing platform with over 150 languages, and also is based on a pay by lesson system, which is really helpful because you might not want to buy a package immediately. You might just want to book a lesson here and there, and I really like how this basically allows you to book it whenever you want, whenever you need it, and it's just really nice, especially for students. So if you use the link to buy $10 worth of lessons, you can get $5 off your first lesson. So guys, use my link in the description to start your language learning journey, and guys, this deal is only for the first 50 users, so be sure to check it before it runs out. Okay, so now let's talk about another method of exercising your learning, which is practice. And I've explained this in almost all of my videos about effective revision. Practicing is one of the most effective ways to exercise your knowledge because you are basically setting yourself up for the exam. Practicing does not necessarily have to be purely exam questions. It can be flashcards, it can be blurting. There's so much more that you could do to exercise your knowledge, and I specifically talked about blurting and flashcards in these videos. If I just want to quickly summarize it, flashcards are basically active recall questions. You don't want to make a block of writing. You want to make sure that the question is something that you could have in the exam, something that refreshes your knowledge, and the answer is something that's succinct, that you can actually memorize and understand. And the answer should always be something that you fully understand. It shouldn't be something that you just aiming to memorize just to memorize it, because you want to be able to apply it to questions. And blurting is basically when you write down everything you know about a topic or a specific subtopic and you just go into detail as much as you can. This is really helpful for those really content dense subjects. Stuff like history, stuff like English, you can't put everything on flashcards, so making sure that you write all of this in one place off memory is actually really effective to test that you actually know it. Another method of exercising your learning, which is the Feynman's technique. This technique is basically the process of explaining something so easily that a 5-year-old would be able to understand it. So you can explain it to a parent, a family member, a friend. You can even video yourself and just explain something to yourself and watch it over to make sure you understand what you're saying. And I find that this is one of the most effective study methods, and it is quite underrated compared to the other ones. So one thing about teaching someone something is that you actually need to know your stuff. Like, you can't just be saying rubbish out of like thin air, because the person will know that you're just speaking just to speak, and they'll probably call you out on it. So the Feynman's technique really helps to solidify your knowledge and also provide you with confidence, because once you've explained something to someone, they might be like, wow, like I didn't know that, or you explained it so well, and that basically adds your confidence that you know the topic, and it can honestly help you do better in the exam, because every single time you're teaching it, you're reinforcing this knowledge in your head. And it's basically a form of active recall if you think about it like that. And finally, let's talk about overcoming the forgetting curve. So if you guys know anything about active recall, you know that this has to be done consistently. You can't just do one blur at the start of September and think that it's still going to be in your mind by July. It's not, it doesn't work like that. So one thing that's really important is that you consistently go over this topic. Once you learn something, you exercise your learning, and then you have to go back it after a certain amount of days. And this basically just ensures that you overcome the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve is basically a graph which shows that every time that you learn something, you're going to slowly forget it. But if you implement times where you go over this topic, the likelihood of you forgetting it will decrease, and it will also take longer for you to forget it. So ideally you can keep going over topics so that by the exam you know everything and you don't necessarily need to cover everything at once. Apps such as Anki and Quizlet basically do this inbuilt in the system, which is really helpful because it saves you the effort of having to look, oh, I haven't done this for a while, I haven't done this for a while, and that can honestly lead to weak spots because you might forget a certain topic, you might forget that you didn't do a certain topic. But I really recommend trying these apps out and seeing if it works for you. If not, then a retrospective timetable is also really helpful. You basically write down all the topics for that subject and then you allocate different times that you're going to go over those topics based on the difficulty of it. So let's say you had a last session in cell biology and you find it really easy. You're probably not going to look at cell biology for another month or another 2 months if you found it that easy. And then another topic which is harder, so let's talk about homeostasis. You find that really hard, you're going to go over that a lot more frequently. So you can go over it after 2 days, you can go after it after 1 week, and you'll slowly build up that interval that you revise it, just so that it always stays in your mind and you don't forget it. It sounds really long and it sounds like, oh, I don't have enough effort, but going over a topic can take you as little as like 10 minutes if you do a few exam questions in that topic. It's not like you have to learn everything from scratch, and the more you do it decreases the likelihood of you having to do that. Essentially, overcoming the forgetting curve basically means that you can slowly learn things throughout the year and not leave it all to the end to cram, because guys, as much as I love a good cram for like a quick exam, I would not recommend it for your finals. So try this method if you haven't already and you will see a lot of improvement in your learning. Guys, we've reached the end of the video. I really hope you found it useful and I hope you learned something new. If you did, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as comment down below of something you would like to see next, because I'm all for video ideas. I'm all for study with me's, advice videos, anything. So guys, I'll see you next time. Bye.